almost 800-meter length, a kilometer length. And the situation of the country itself indicates that what we are seeing, that whatever the situation or whatever the activity is going on in the Himalayan region, Nepal being at the central location, we are facing the consequences on the different changes that is going on, the climate, the different disasters, different challenges for the water availability, although water is tremendously available, but the availability for the actual use and so on. So this is what we are having the or experiencing, and what we are facing the challenges to address the future need to assess the resources for the benefit of the people and society, and as a whole, the development of the nation. So, in relation to the extension of the Himalayan range, this is the general geological setup of the Himalayan range, and we share the same type of the structures that is extended from east to west throughout the entire Himalayan range. So there is the political and geographical boundaries, but the natural boundary does not follow the political boundaries. So we can find a similar structure and similar geology even in the eastern part of the Nepal, and even on the western part of the Nepal Himalaya, that is continued throughout the range. So this is the setup of Nepal in the Himalayan region. Now I would like to come to the point that if we observe the estimation of the all water balance, that indicates that almost ocean and seas, that covers 94%, and lakes and reservoirs less than 0.01, swamp, river channel, and soil moisture all less than 0.01%, and groundwater 4%, ice cap and glacier 2%. Why I'm showing this data? This is important in the context that we are always looking for the freshwater resource to meet our demand, either it is agriculture demand or irrigation demand or for the drinking water demand. But if we observe in this data, we can see that very limited amount of freshwater is available on the earth. And among the freshwater, if we still observe at the right end, sorry. I don't have control on this. So if you observe on the right end, then ocean and seas, that is very old water is available here, geology in terms of geology. But if you observe on the swamp, this is also 1 to 10 years, less than around 10 years and old in lake and reservoir. Soil moisture 2:1 year, and groundwater 2:10,000 years. So why I'm concerned on the age? The more age of the water residence on the particular zone, then we can expect that the salinity of the water goes on increasing. And more salinity means that is not usable, and that is not usable appropriate for the irrigation as well as for drinking purpose. So very limited amount of water is available on the earth, and we have to focus on this freshwater resource that is only around 3 or 4%, and among that also, among the 3% of fresh water, we can see that 30% is occupied, or 30% volume is from the groundwater, and ice caps and glacier that occupies almost 68.7%. And among the other water, that is surface water, accounts only 0.3% of the total available volume. And if we calculate on the if we further break down the surface water, then river accounts 2%, swamp 11%, lakes 87%. So this figure, I think, is giving us some concept that how important the groundwater resource is in respect to the availability or in respect to the drinking, irrigation, or any other purpose that is what we are requiring or what we demand for the society. And if we observe the groundwater irrigation area covered by in different time period, then this is a rather old data, but it gives some information that how the use of the groundwater is being increasing. If we observe the data of the USA, it was 23% of the total irrigation was from the groundwater in 1950. Now it is in 2005, it has been 45%. Likewise in India, it was 30% in 50 and 62% in 2005. In the Pakistan, Punjab, what it means that this Punjab irrigation is from the basically Indus irrigation project, and it started after the 60s. So before 60, it was only 5% of the total area, irrigation area from groundwater. Now it is 34%, even if there is the surface irrigation from the Indus River basin. Even in the Bangladesh, it was 4% in 72 and 80%, it increased to 80% in 2015. If we see the data of Nepal, it was only 12% in 1995, and it has become 30% of the area, agriculture area have been irrigated by the groundwater by 2016. Now it is much more increased in recent time. If you observe the global data, it is around 40% of the total irrigated land is being using the groundwater. So it shows the importance of the groundwater on our daily life, in our irrigation, in our industrial purpose, in the drinking water, and how we are dealing with the groundwater. That's the main important aspect to be covered. It means we always focus on the larger mega projects of the surface water irrigation, and those larger mega projects requires millions or billions dollars of the investment, and that requires the same amount of or continuous investment in the maintenance of the system. But if you observe on the groundwater, then the groundwater can be available even with a less investment, and that requires less amount of money in the maintenance of the system. Likewise, there are some benefit of the surface water and groundwater. So if we cannot isolate these two resources separately, because if we use only one resource, then that will be exhausted or that has a limitation to meet our demand. But if we use both of the resources, then that is the conjunctive use of both surface and groundwater resource, then that may be the sustainable way of utilizing the natural resource, and hence we have to focus on both of the aspects. But we should not undermine that groundwater can be used to any desired, exploited to any desired amount, because that resource is also going to be exhausted in future. For the non-geologist, this diagram I put. If we talk about the groundwater, whatever on the water flowing on the surface, that we normally deal with the surface water, and what is going below the ground surface we call the groundwater. But that groundwater can also be subdivided into several parts, basically into unconfined aquifer and confined aquifer. What we mean by the aquifer is it is a geological formation that can store a sufficient amount of water, as well as that can yield water through the wells and through the natural spring. So unconfined aquifer are normally in continuous interaction with the atmosphere. So it means if there is a rainfall, then immediately the water table will rise. And if there is a prolonged period of dryness, then the water table will gradually decline. But in contrast to this, the confined aquifer, it does not have the direct immediate response to the rainfall and the drier period. But Most of the water that can be exploited through wells is from the confined aquifer. The total amount of water will be available more than the unconfined aquifer. But there is the limitation of utilizing this aquifer because we need to drill a deep well, and that will cost a little bit more or some multiple times than we drill a well in the unconfined aquifer. So unconfined aquifer can be easily exploitable with low investment in comparison to the confined aquifer. But if we compare the water availability from unconfined and confined aquifer, normally the thick layer of the unconfined aquifer will yield more amount of water through the wells. So this is what we normally call it unconfined and confined aquifer, and in Nepalese context, we also call it a shallow T well and deep T well in terms of the exploitation techniques. If the well is drilled less than 50 meters in depth, that is mostly tapping the unconfined aquifer, then we call it shallow T well. And if the well is more than 45 or 50 meter depth, that normally exploit the water from the confined aquifer, then it is the deep T well. So we will be coming to this shallow T well and deep T well again. So if we have to assess the water resource of the country, then we must observe the terrain condition. So this digital elevation model, that is a very coast model, that shows that the southern belt of the Nepal Himalaya is consisting of a rather plain area, low elevation area. And the more we go towards the north, the elevation increases. And even within the average width of 190 kilometers, then we can experience the change in elevation from around 60 meter to 8,848 meter. And the area of the country, this is the revised area and the revised boundary of Nepal, that accounts 147,516 square kilometers. And within this, the point to be noted is that the southern belt, that occupies less area of the country, less territory, but the northern belt, that is the mountainous region, and this area occupies almost half of the population. So we can expect that the water stress is more in the southern belt, and the water stress is less in the northern belt with respect to the aerial coverage. But if we really observe the groundwater availability and availability in terms of the easy access, then the northern belt or the mountainous region is having harsh condition, because mostly there are many rivers and tributaries, but these rivers and tributaries flows through the deeper gorges, and the settlements are at the elevated region. And there is always challenge to make the water available to the settlements. And therefore, the water availability is rather less in the northern belt in spite of the availability of water. But in the southern belt, since the area is plain and we can see that so many rivers that is flowing from the north to south that passes through these areas, and there is sufficient chances to recharge the groundwater, both confined and unconfined aquifer. So the exploitation of the aquifer can be easy, and that is in practice in the southern belt. Whereas in case of the northern belt, the groundwater exploitation is in the traditional ways till, because whatever is available through the springs, the people are relying on that. And in recent time, most of the springs are being dried out because of so many construction of the road network, as well as so-called climate change impact that is resulting in the change in the precipitation pattern and the intensity of the precipitation. That is having the indirect or direct effect to the groundwater recharge. Therefore, the more challenges will be in the northern belt in future also. with respect to the water availability. So this is the major river basins of Nepal that we normally deal, that are Kosi, Gandak, and Karnali, Mahakali, three basins. Sometimes we separate the Karnali and Mahakali basin separately, but here I have combined. And these basins, why I am showing is that most of these basins that share the territorial boundary even with the Tibetan areas in the north, and with the that continues towards the south, even in the Indian territory. If you consider the Kosi Basin, the much larger part is being occupied in the Tibetan region, and the Kosi Basin continues to the south. So whatever is happening in the north, even in the Tibet, is going to be having the impact to our region, and whatever is happening in our region is going to impact the southern region, even in the India, that we have seen in the past, like even in the glacial lake outflow flood, or the normal flood, monsoon flood in these major river basins. And the general precipitation scenario also shows that the monsoon precipitation is more in the eastern, that goes on decreasing towards the south. Likewise, the westerlies that we call the winter precipitation, that is more in the western part, and that decreases towards the east. This is the general scenario of the precipitation, and precipitation has direct implication to the water availability. And let us remember that the northernmost part is occupied by the glaciers of many basins, these three major basins. And these glaciers are continuously melting during the summer period, and that are feeding to the rivers. But we should note that even in the during the time when there is no snow melt, then the rivers are flowing. Why the rivers are flowing? That is the base flow due to the groundwater contribution, and hence the importance of groundwater is linked even to the availability of the surface water, or the continuity of the flow on the rivers. If we observe the medium independent or the river originating from the Surya range, then these are some are perennial and some are intermittent streams. This is the physiographic region of the country, and what we see, the southernmost belt called the Taray Plain, followed by Shivalik, then Middle Mountain, and High Mountain, and Himalaya. This is very generalized physiographic subregion of Nepal, which can be further break down to specific physiographic region that I show in the later one. Even with this general physiographic division, we can see that each and every zone is extended from east to west, and each and every zone has almost similar thickness in our region. Although the Tarai region is somewhere very narrow, like in the Dang area here, and the Chure continues to that. Even in the Chiton, the Dun Valley is being continued up to the border. And if we say the Surya range, or the Shivalik we call, then there are some Dun valleys, like major Dun valleys, Trijuga, Chiton, and Alparasi East, that is same valleys. Even in the Surkhet Valley or Dang Valley, these are the major valleys in the within the Surya range. So this is a little bit elaborated physiographic subdivision. Why I am showing this physiographic subdivision is that the water availability is directly related to this physiographic region. So if we say Tarai, or the northern edge of the Gangetic Plain, or even we call the northern extension of the Indo-Gangetic Plain, that is having 10 to 50 kilometer of width, and ranging in elevation up to 200 meters. And the Surya range that is having the normally the sedimentary rocks, and so we cannot find the confined, unconfined type of aquifer that we normally have in the Tarai region, where the sedimentary layers that comprises of several comprise of unconfined and several confined aquifer horizon from where we can extract the groundwater. But in case of the Churia region, it is not like that. But even within the Churia region, we have the Dun Valley, and that is almost similarity in nature with the Tarai plain because of the sedimentation pattern. Both are fluvial sediments derived from the rivers debouching from the region. And then we have the immediately high-rise mountains, that is the Mahabharat range. This range is having the problem of the groundwater, less availability of groundwater, and groundwater occurs only in fractured rocks mostly. Then we have the midland region further north, that is ranging in elevation from 300 to 2000 meters. Though the basement rock is the lesser Himalayan rocks, then we can have the thick sediments, even either the fluvial sediment or colluvial or the residual soil that can have the confined or unconfined aquifer in the midland zone also. And then we have the four Himalaya consisting of the rocky area of lesser Himalaya, followed by the higher Himalaya with the more crystalline rock. And we can expect all groundwater available in the fractured rocks in these regions. So the availability is different depending upon the geologic or geomorphic condition. So I have summarized the same here. So I will not read each and every line. So the major river systems are directly linked to the availability of the groundwater recharge as well as the surface water availability. But the river water is not always adequate and sufficiently meeting the demand of the people that who are living in the upland areas, and the lifting of the water to meet the demand will be much more expensive. And we have the alternative of groundwater in that case. So we contribute about 70% during the dry season of the annual flow of Ganga River. It means whatever the Ganga River discharge is major contributed through the rivers that are flowing through Nepal. And groundwater occurs in different natural settings in Nepal, which is governed by the geomorphology, physiography, and geology that we just discussed, that groundwater is available in fractured rock in the northern region in the higher Himalaya or the basement rock of the lesser Himalaya. But groundwater is available in the sedimentary layers in the dune valleys, midland, as well as in the Tarai plain. So groundwater exploitation techniques is also different in the different conditions. So if we observe the major rivers flowing through the Himalayas, then we can see that the Shivalik region has very low discharge and low, though the catchment area is more. And in the river originating near the middle mountain and hills, there is 14.5 cubic kilometer per year of discharge, annual discharge, and the much larger discharge from the river originating from the Himalaya, that is in context of the surface water resources. But if we see the groundwater in the hills and mountain, it is not well investigated. The spring water has been traditionally used and which is still continued. But in recent time, the trend of drilling the tube well and exploiting the groundwater has been evolved in the hilly and mountainous region. But there is a challenge that the mountain aquifer is much more delicate than the aquifer in the Tarai region or in the plain area, because even with small changes in the exploitation rate, then the availability will be drastically changed. So It is good to exploit the aquifer to meet the demand of the society. But at the same time, we have to be cautious about the sustainability of the resources so that we can use the resources even in the future. How we can make the resource sustainable? That is another great issues to be discussed and great issues to be addressed while exploiting the mountain aquifer. And the Tarai and inner valleys, fairly well explored. There are so many tube wells, so many investigations have been done, and these are the main source of drinking water as well as for the irrigation. And that irrigation to meet the round the year irrigation facility. In the valleys, that is in the midland, Kahan Valley, we have been extensively used. Also, we have overexploited the groundwater resources in the valley. And the exploitation began recently in Pokhara Valley, in other valleys also. So this is general scenario of utilization. And if we see the total groundwater reserve in Tarai, estimated from different method, but I have shown one value that is 8,800 million cubic meter of the annual recharge, groundwater recharge in the Tarai plain. And how we are exploiting a little bit 2-3 years older data. From the shallow tube wells, that is 1161, deep tube well 151, groundwater extraction for domestic 462, extraction for industrial use 161. The first two are for the irrigation purpose from shallow and deep tube well, and even shallow or deep tube well that is drilled for the domestic use comprised of 462 million per cubic meter of annual amount. And overall, and irrigation. Then what I found that total irrigable land of Nepal is 14718,100 hectare. Out of that, the projected irrigable land through the surface water is 25,745 hectares. From the groundwater is 122,100 hectares. So we can see the data is that utilization of groundwater for the irrigation is going on in increasing trend in comparison to the surface water. Why we are seeing such type of data and such approach? It is only because groundwater is deliverable, groundwater is made available at point of the command area, and there is less issues to utilize the groundwater in comparison to the surface water, and there is less investment, or we can make continuous investment in groundwater, whereas for the surface water irrigation system, we have to make one-time large investment and continuous investment for the system maintenance. And so there are so many benefit of groundwater over the surface water, and hence the groundwater utilization is being focused in Nepalese context also. So this is some of the data that almost 42% of cultivated area are from around the irrigation, only 17%. This 17% round the irrigation is also mostly from the groundwater contribution, because surface water flow is very low during the pre-monsoon season and when we require water for to irrigate. And also, most of 72% of the population that is having the access to the water supply is also from the major part contribution from the groundwater. And with this background, there are some aspects, reasons to use groundwater. It has controlled access and use. System can be made available close to the command area for irrigation or even for the drinking close to the settlement. And gradual investment is possible, whereas it is not possible. And limited land is occupied by the groundwater system, whereas for the surface water irrigation system, the canal network or trunk canal or distributor canal that occupies a large amount of the land surface, and the utilization of groundwater drastically resolves the water right issues among the headwater and tailend farmers in the irrigation, because there is this issue is always there while utilizing the surface water resources. Not only in Nepal, it is the problem of the worldwide. So there are so many approaches to resolve these issues that has been developed, and the system have been designed accordingly so that there will not be issue among the headwater farmer and farmer. But this problem is drastically reduced utilizing the groundwater resource. So this data and this information gives the importance of groundwater, even though the groundwater is less exploited in the mountainous region in our context. But the heavily populated plain areas in the southern belt that is utilizing the groundwater, and there is a large amount of the irrigable land surface, that is the agricultural land is mostly distributed in the southern region, and there could be the problem of water right issues in case of utilizing surface water, but the groundwater is reducing that. This data is I have obtained from the government of Nepal side, the major irrigation system in the central Nepal. That is a little bit older data, but here also the groundwater used to be 2,800 hectare area being irrigated by the groundwater only in the Bara and Parsa region. But if we cover the entire region, Tarai region from Dhapa to Kanchanpur, then the contribution of groundwater for the irrigation will rise. Even though we have the larger surface irrigation system like Kamala, Manasmara, Bagmati irrigation, Narayan irrigation project, and Narayan lift irrigation, Khogeri irrigation only in the central part, now Sikta irrigation project, and so on. But even the import irrigation remains unchallenged. That was the utilization of groundwater for irrigation. If we observe on the use of groundwater even for the drinking, then it is almost contributing more than the surface water because of easy availability, good quality, and less effort to be given for the quality control and so on. So many aspects or benefits are there. How we are exploiting the groundwater in this data shows that from the entire eastern part to western part, we have drilled around 1,200 deep well. That was 4 years back data. Now I suppose it is around 1,600 number of deep well. And if you observe the shallow well, after irrigation, deep well, we have such a large number of wells. Only in the Rupande district, that is utilized groundwater, there are more number of deep well, and the supply is minimum. Now in the Samrit Tarai irrigation project, the number of wells are being increased annually. Investigation also have been done through the utilization of geophysical methods. And the geophysical methods have been utilized in mostly in the central part in comparison to the western part and rather in the eastern part. And the investigation is being increasing annually. This is just to show the data that whatever we are now exploiting the groundwater and investigating the groundwater is concentrated in the Tarai and the Dun Valley region, and the mountainous aquifer have been less exploited. So this is the availability of groundwater normally in the different physiographic region of Nepal. But what are the challenges? The most important challenge is being talked about the climate change. There are so many sectors to be affected by the climate change, and I will talk about the water availability. Decrease in water resource, drying of wells, decrease in flow of spring, stream, and river. How it is happening that we have been experiencing this, whether it is because of the natural climate change or man-made climate change is happening. That is shown by the data. But how much we are ready to adopt for such climate change impact? That is the main point to be considered. And that will increase the water crisis. It means the surface water flow during the pre-monsoon will be further decreased. So that will depend only on the base flow. That decreased surface water availability during the low flow period will reduce the irrigable land, because the system that we have designed for the present flow will not meet the same situation in the future. That means less command area will be uh, addressed or will be irrigated by the system that we are having now. The hydropower projects will also be challenged, threatened, because it will not be able to produce the power as per the installed capacity. So, since we have observed the climate change, whatever the reason may be, it will have the direct implication to the groundwater. It has direct implication in the sense that there will be a change in the precipitation pattern. It means instead of uh, high duration, low intensity precipitation, we have low duration, high intensity precipitation. So the intensity of precipitation is increased. It means that there will be less chances for the water to interact with the soil, and ultimate result is that low amount of groundwater will be recharged. In the in that condition, the water availability, even through the groundwater, will have direct implication of the climate change. And how we are going to deal with such cases in future is another issue to be raised. And much of the rivers during the low flow will be recharged from the groundwater. That means groundwater will be contributing to the surface water flow in future more than the estimate. So drying up of wells, decrease in spring, this is what we are experiencing at the present also. So I will show some of the information that we have collected from different region or different basins. In all sub-basins of the Kosi, Tomor, Arun, Dudhkosi, Sunkosi, Likhu, Indravati, we have significantly observed the climate change impact. Likewise, in the Bagmati River Basin, Narayani, Tinau, Sethi, or wherever it may be, it is either shown from the major data or from the reported by the people. Let us see how important the groundwater is in the mountainous region. Much of our society that have been developed along the river bank only because there is the water, easy water access. Likewise, in the mountainous region, the settlement was distributed uh, nearby the water available location. It means the water available in the sense mostly through the spring in the mountainous region. So, if there is a change in the spring discharge or reduction in the spring discharge, then that will not be meeting the need of the mountain people, domestic need or irrigation water demand. It will not be fulfilled. So, in this context, we have to think how to preserve the groundwater resource in the mountainous region, and how to exploit the existing resource, because the resource is to exploit. It is not only to for the natural resource that should be kept without utilizing, but that resource be utilized sustainably. So this is what we have to think for the better management of the water resources. So in some cases, the water is or the spring is through the fractured rocks. In other cases, it is through the even the sediments, that is either colluvial or residual soil. And we can see that this is the such recharge zone for the spring at the downslope, and we have to intervene at these sites. We can see that the vegetation is drastically reduced. It means the spring shade, that is upper catchment area of the spring, should be preserved and it should be monitored. So the public enforcement, pollution, whatever giving the negative impact to the groundwater resource should be considered in the groundwater management of the mountainous area. So this is the upper reserve for this spring. So if we don't protect these areas, the spring discharge as well as the quality of water will be different than at the present. So we can see the infrastructure development, either road construction basically, is drastically affecting the groundwater condition. It means some springs have been disappeared, in which the nearby population used to rely on the domestic water demand to fulfilling the water demand. And also, in some cases, the vegetation decrease. That will also reduce the total precipitation overall in the climate, local climate, microclimatic condition, as well as the amount of groundwater to be recharged will be different. If the area is covered, it will be more water recharged. If the area is not covered by vegetation, it means it is converted into barren. Then the less water will be recharged. Therefore, the watershed management practice as well as spring shed water management should also always be together with the exploitation process. So what we can do? Water stakeholders must be involved in the development and management of groundwater resource. It means whatever management plan is being formed should not be from the top bottom level. It should be from bottom top level. The approach should be different. It means if you consider the voices of the stakeholders while making the plan, that plan is easily implementable. Otherwise, the plan cannot be implemented because the local stakeholder will not take the ownership of the plan. The conservative use of surface and groundwater is an inevitable part for the sustainable use of the water resources. So we have seen the data that both surface and groundwater is available. We are utilizing surface water and groundwater uh, for the irrigation as well as for the drinking purpose also. But the calculation should be done, how much water, surface water is available in particular river basin for the particular area, and how much groundwater is available, and how much water is exploitable. So if we work on some calculated data, then a sustainable use is possible. Otherwise, we will not be able to meet the to keep the water resource for the future. It will not be available. So ultimate goal is that over exploitation of either surface water or groundwater is not permissible. But the over exploitation is more dangerous or more challenging in case of the groundwater, because in case of surface water, if the water is available, then it is usable. And the next year also, again, there will be precipitation, there will be snow melt, and the river will start flowing. But in case of groundwater, if we overexploit the aquifer, then the complete aquifer skeleton will be changed. And even if we recharge the aquifer, then we may not be we may not be getting the same amount of water before the over exploitation resulted. It means after the aquifer skeleton is changed, then the total permeability will be changed, and the water that is available through the tube wells will not be the same as before. It means it will be decreased in another case. So the groundwater resource is important. It should be utilized, but it should be utilized with due attention and careful management. For this, strict regulation should be imposed, which is not at the present case. And this regulation is more important while exploiting the mountain aquifer, because the mountain aquifer is more delicate in comparison to the aquifer in the Tarai region. So institutional mechanism for control use of groundwater resource is less effective at present, and it should be made more effective in the future. For the groundwater recharge, then the Bhavar zone that is extended from the foothills of the Shivalik region to some kilometers southward. The width varies from location to location, and that area is considered to be the prominent area for the recharge of groundwater, deep groundwater of the entire Tarai region. So, unfortunately, the Bhavar zone that we used to call as Charkose Dhari, that have been depleted in terms of the area, in terms of the quality of the forest area. The quality of the forest area means the forest is no more full of biodiversity used to be in past. A natural forest is having different types of grasses, different types of bush, as well as trees, different species, and that is what the rich in biodiversity. And such rich biodiversity, if the forest is at such condition, then that can have more groundwater recharge. And another challenge is that the Bhavar zone is depleted in area. It is because the east-west highway normally passes through the Bhavar zone, and the settlement have been increased in the Bhavar zone. We can see the case of the Butwal that entirely lies in the Bhavar zone, and from Butwal to Bhaira now it is all urbanized area. So the recharge zone is being depleted. If there is more settlement or increasing settlement, in that case the Bhavar zone groundwater recharging through the Bhavar zone will be deteriorated quality. And if the deteriorated quality of water is being recharged, then the entire aquifer will be polluted. Therefore, the Bhavar zone development in Bhavar zone should be considered, but it is not at the present case. So we will be having much more problem even in the Tarai region groundwater in terms of quality and quantity in the near future. In near future, it means in some decades. Even though we have surplus of water at present, it will not be the same in the future. If we continue reducing the recharge area and compromising the quality of water being recharged. So this is also one of the threatening in future. The withdrawal of the groundwater in urbanized city like Kathmandu Valley is more than the recharge rate. That means our aquifer is being exhausted. We are over exploiting, even though the contribution of groundwater for the system or our water supply system is significant for the Kathmandu Valley case also at present. And the mountain aquifer exploitation should be done after a thorough assessment of mountain hydrogeology, that is assessment of groundwater potential, assessment of groundwater recharge potential, and establishment of appropriate recharge mechanism. It means if we are going to exploit certain amount of water, then in that case, the present recharge rate will not be able to keep the water balance same after the exploitation. So whatever we are going exploiting, that should be additionally recharged, and the recharge ponds or some recharge mechanism, some construction of the embankment or some water spreading mechanism, there are such types that is site specific in the mountainous region should be followed. It means if we drill a well, deep well in some exploiting the mountain aquifer in mountainous region, then together with drilling, we have to install such recharge mechanisms so that the water resource will be sustained and we will be able to use the water resource even in the future. And we have to address the climate change issue, because as we can see in so many literatures that the water availability will be compromised or it will be degraded in future, because with climate change, water degradation is possible, is expected. That degradation will directly control the total amount of water being recharged groundwater. And proper assessment needs to be done at the present condition and for the future or change condition. It means whatever the model results are available, we have to utilize those model results, because the climate change impact will not be same in all river basin. We have experienced that the climate change impact will be less in some basin and more in some other basin. Even in the climate change impact, even if there is not much change in the precipitation, but the pattern of precipitation, it means the intensity and duration of precipitation that is going to be changed in the context of climate change will also reduce the total groundwater recharge. So whatever the condition is, either through the exploitation or through the climate change, groundwater is the only source of water for the people living in the mountain. We should not forget this. Therefore, in any context, we have to preserve this resource. We have to use this resource to sustain our society, but with some measures. So this is what I have to share with you, and I hope you have enjoyed it. Thank you very much. And I will be pleased to listen to you.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, Dinesh
Thank
sir.
you for this wonderful presentation. Lots of information. Also, thank you, sir. Now I suggest Raju sir. I request Raju sir to, if you have collected some questions. Please, Raju sir. Okay, questions, sir.
Hazir Binil sir Machu. Thank you,
Okay.
Binil sir. Okay, thank you, sir, for wonderful insight for this about water resources. There are a few query hand raised, and I request the participant to raise hand. You can do it in your participant column. So I will start the first one with Susil Pangeni. Go ahead, please. Unmute yourself and speak, please.
Unmute
Susil.
yourself, Susil.
Okay, I can do that also. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Raju sir. Yeah, I'm listening. Thank you, Dr. Pathak, for the wonderful presentation. I have some questions related to like socioeconomic, geopolitical, and collaboration with physics department, because I'm related to physics department, and currently I'm studying at Wayne State University, Detroit, Michigan, USA. First of all, my question is from the socioeconomic perspective. Yes, as I'm from Tansen, in the dry season we have a lot of water crisis here. So, in the perspective of a hydrogeologist like you, how do you suggest Nepal government or other community to address this kind of water crisis in whole hilly region of Nepal? This is my first question.
Okay.
My second question is, currently we have been facing geopolitical crisis with India, and what is the involvement of hydrogeologists like you and others to settle down those kind of information about the different main rivers of Nepal? They have always the political crisis, even for the Gandaki in terms of Susta. So what is the involvement of hydrogeologists like you on that kind of thing? Does government of Nepal and India provide you like you to settle down those kind of issues? And my last question is, I'm from physics department, and I have heard about the geophysics as well, and some of my brothers are studying this subject. And what about the future of geophysics and collaboration of geology and physics and other department in Nepal, and what is the demand of our market in Nepal? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your very interesting and important issues that we have raised in 3 queries. Let me answer you from mountain area water availability issues. Actually, most of the mountainous area in Nepal are facing the water scarcity problem. And that water scarcity problem is not only because water is not available. It is because water is available, but we have not such techniques to exploit it properly. Whatever we are relying on is on the natural spring, and the spring occurs only when there is the intersection of the ground surface with the water table. But if the water table is below the ground surface, then there is no spring. But water is available in the mountainous area. That is why now the exploitation technique have been changed, or it has been focused to use the technique to drill wells, either vertical or inclined or horizontal well, so as to exploit the groundwater. Even in the Alpa area, you might have known that in the Madi Khan, there are so many springs have been used for the irrigation at present. That the groundwater responsible department of Nepal, within the irrigation department, they are going carrying out or supporting for the utilization of spring for the irrigation purpose as well as not only for drinking. So my point is that there is the groundwater, but we have not utilized sufficient techniques, tools and techniques to exploit those water for to meet our demand. So in future, we have to work on towards utilizing those tools and techniques for further extraction of groundwater. But what I have pointed previously is that mountain aquifer is very delicate. So if we only exploit without putting the provision for the recharge, then such exploitation will not be sustained. It will be either for 1 year or 2 years. Then there will be no more groundwater. So for the better sustainability of the resource, we have to give due attention for the groundwater recharge in terms of either spring shade or watershed management. That is one point. And we have experience that in many areas, there is the migration of the people only because there is no water. And recently, the groundwater resource exploitation people involved in the government of Nepal have addressed such issues by drilling the tube well and making water available for the people so that they will not suffer the problem to the level that they have to migrate. And regarding your second issue about the geopolitics, we have heard so many issues of transboundary water, or surface water related problems. It means if the upper headwater water is more used by the country, then the country immediately or down in the downstream will not have sufficient amount of water. So there are some treaties and some regulation of the worldwide. It is easy for the surface water to assess how much water is flowing through the river. That can be done through the installing the some of the river gauging station and measuring the distance and assessing that how much discharge will be in particular months of the year. And depending on that, how much water is being used from the country in the upper reaches and how much water is to be supplied to the demand for the country in the lower reaches. So such transboundary water resource issues are there and that are being solved with some standard norms and procedure. But regarding the groundwater, it is much more complicated because we cannot directly measure the discharge and we can not directly see where the water is flowing because it is not necessary that if the surface water is flowing from north to south, the groundwater should also be flowing north to south always. So the groundwater flow direction, groundwater total amount, and the availability of the groundwater, all these